On her wedding day, my son's wife banned me from official photos. "You ruin the album's aesthetic. Stay in the kitchen." 3 days later, I sold the apartment where they lived for free. When they returned from their honeymoon and realized the locks were changed, they froze. "I'm glad to have you here, Av. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Roberta, and I'm 62 years old. I never imagined that my son's wedding day would become the moment I finally understood how invisible I had become in my own family. But sometimes the most painful truths arrive wrapped in white silk and fake smiles. The morning of Darren's wedding started like any mother of the groom day should. I woke up at 5:30, my stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. After months of planning, my only child was finally marrying Bryn, the woman who had swept him off his feet 3 years ago. I had chosen my dress carefully. A modest navy blue ensemble that wouldn't compete with the bride but would photograph beautifully. At least, that's what I thought. I arrived at the venue early, clutching the small gift I'd wrapped for the couple, antique silver picture frames that had belonged to my grandmother. Darren had always loved family history, and I thought they'd be perfect for their first home photos. The venue was stunning, a historic mansion with sprawling gardens that probably cost more than I made in 6 months at my job at the insurance office. Bryn floated around in her elaborate white gown, directing everyone like a military general. She looked stunning, I'll give her that. Tall, blonde, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. She'd grown up in wealth, something she reminded everyone about regularly, though never directly. "Mrs. Morrison," she called out to me, using my maiden name instead of acknowledging that Darren and I shared the same last name. "Could you help in the kitchen? The caterers need someone to organize the appetizer trays." I blinked, confused. I thought I was supposed to be getting ready for photos soon. Isn't the family session starting in an hour? Bryn's smile was sharp as crystal. "Oh, about that. We've decided to keep the formal photos intimate, just immediate family. You understand." The words hit me like a slap. Immediate family. As if I, who had raised Darren alone for 18 years after his father abandoned us, somehow didn't qualify. As if the woman who worked double shifts to pay for his college, who held his hand through every fever and heartbreak, was now relegated to kitchen duty. "I don't understand," I said quietly, feeling the eyes of nearby guests turning toward us. "I'm Darren's mother." Bryn's laugh was light and dismissive. "Of course you are. But honestly, Mrs. Morrison, you'd ruin the album's aesthetic. The photographer is very particular about maintaining a cohesive look. And your dress. Well, it's very..." She paused, looking me up and down. "Practical. Why don't you stay in the kitchen where you'll be more comfortable? I'm sure you're much better with serving trays than posing anyway." The humiliation burned through me like acid. Around us, Bryn's bridesmaids, all perfectly groomed daughters of her parents' country club friends, giggled behind their manicured hands. I could feel my cheeks flaming red, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched my purse. "Where's Darren?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's getting ready with the groomsmen." "Very busy. You know how it is. Men and their wedding day jitters." Bryn waved her hand dismissively, her engagement ring, a 3-carat diamond I'd helped Darren pay for, though he didn't know that, catching the light. "Now, about those appetizers. I wanted to march upstairs and find my son. I wanted to demand an explanation. But something in Bryn's eyes, something cold and calculating, made me pause. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was planned, deliberate. She had orchestrated this moment probably weeks ago, knowing exactly how to position it so I'd look like the difficult mother-in-law if I protested. "Of course," I heard myself saying, my voice strangely calm. "I'd be happy to help in the kitchen." Bryn's smile widened, victorious. "Wonderful. I knew you'd understand. You're so practical, Mrs. Morrison. So sensible." As I walked toward the kitchen, my legs feeling like they belonged to someone else, I passed a mirror in the hallway. The woman looking back at me was a stranger, gray-haired, lined around the eyes, wearing a dress that suddenly seemed dowdy and cheap. When had I become this person? When had I become someone who could be dismissed so easily? The kitchen was bustling with professional caterers who barely glanced at me as I began arranging silver trays. My hands moved automatically while my mind reeled. Through the service window, I could see the photography session beginning on the mansion's grand staircase. Bryn posed radiant and glowing, surrounded by her parents, her sister, her bridesmaids. Darren stood handsome in his black tuxedo, smiling broadly as the photographer captured what would become their official wedding memories. I wasn't in a single shot. "Ma'am?" One of the caterers touched my arm gently. "You're crying on the shrimp." I looked down to see tears splashing onto the appetizer tray I'd been arranging. I hadn't even realized I was crying. "I'm sorry," I whispered, stepping back from the table. "Hey, don't worry about it. Weddings are emotional." The young woman, probably in her 20s with kind eyes, handed me a paper towel. "You look like you need some air. Why don't you step outside for a minute?" I nodded gratefully and slipped out the kitchen's back door into the garden. The afternoon sun was warm on my face, but I felt cold all the way through. I sat on a small stone bench hidden behind a cluster of rose bushes, far enough from the festivities that no one would see me fall apart. 37 years. That's how long it had been since Darren's father walked out on us when my son was just 6 months old. 37 years of working 2 jobs, of cutting coupons and shopping sales, of putting every dream on hold so my boy could have everything he needed. I'd watched him graduate valedictorian from high school, earn a full scholarship to State University, land his first job at a prestigious accounting firm. I'd been so proud, so grateful that all the sacrifice had been worth it. But sitting there in that garden, invisible at my own son's wedding, I realized something that made my stomach turn. All those years, I hadn't just been providing for Darren. I'd been training him to see me as expendable, the woman who handled the practical things, who solved problems quietly in the background, who never made demands or caused scenes. I pulled out my phone and looked at the last text I'd sent Darren 3 days ago. "So excited for your big day. Love you." He'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji. A thumbs-up emoji to his mother, 3 days before his wedding. The sound of laughter drifted from the main reception area. Through the rose bushes, I could see guests beginning to gather for the ceremony. In an hour, I would sit in some back row, watching my son marry a woman who had just made it crystal clear that I was nothing more than hired help in her eyes. But as I sat there, something strange happened. The devastating sadness that had been crushing my chest began to transform into something else. Something harder. Something colder. For 37 years, I had swallowed every slight, every dismissal, every moment of being taken for granted, because I told myself it was what mothers did. We sacrificed. We endured. We stayed silent. I thought about the envelope hidden in my bedroom dresser at home, the one containing the deed to the apartment where Darren and Bryn lived rent-free, the apartment they believed was a wedding gift from Bryn's parents, the apartment I had secretly purchased with my retirement savings, my inheritance from my mother, and a loan I was still paying off. They had no idea. I stood up slowly, smoothing my practical navy dress, and walked back toward the venue. But I didn't return to the kitchen. Instead, I found my assigned seat in the very last row, behind all the other guests, behind the vendors and distant acquaintances. The perfect spot for someone who apparently didn't matter. As the ceremony began and I watched Darren look adoringly at his bride, I made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and began typing a very important email to my real estate attorney. Some lessons, I realized, could only be taught one way. The wedding was beautiful. The reception was elegant. And through it all, I smiled and nodded and played the role of the grateful, unimportant mother perfectly. But inside, I was planning something that would teach my new daughter-in-law exactly what happened when you tried to erase Roberta Morrison from her own son's life. 3 days after the wedding, I sat in my small kitchen drinking my morning coffee and staring at a stack of documents I'd kept hidden for over 2 years. The deed to 894 Maple Street, apartment 12B, the place my son and his new wife called home, the place they thought was a generous wedding gift from Bryn's wealthy parents. They had no idea that every month for the past 24 months, I'd been making the mortgage payments, that every utility bill, every maintenance fee, every property tax statement came directly to my mailbox, that the down payment had consumed my entire inheritance from my mother, $35,000 she'd saved over decades of careful living, money she'd intended to secure my retirement. I'd given it all to ensure my son had a beautiful start to his marriage. The irony wasn't lost on me now, sitting alone in my cramped one-bedroom apartment while they lived in luxury 6 blocks away. But that's what mothers do, isn't it? We sacrifice everything for our children's happiness, even when they don't know we're doing it. The story of how I came to own that apartment began 18 months before the wedding, when Darren first brought Bryn home to meet me. I'd prepared for weeks, cleaning my little apartment until it sparkled, cooking his favorite meal, pot roast with mashed potatoes, the same dinner I'd made every Sunday when he was growing up. I wanted to make a good impression on the woman who'd captured my son's heart. Bryn had walked into my home and barely concealed her shock. Her eyes swept over my secondhand furniture, my small kitchen with its outdated appliances, my careful decorating that made the best of limited space and an even more limited budget. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. "This is so cozy," she'd said, the word hanging in the air like an insult wrapped in politeness. During dinner, as I served them my carefully prepared meal, Bryn talked extensively about her childhood home, a 5-bedroom colonial with a pool and tennis court, family vacations to Europe, private schools and country clubs. She didn't ask me a single question about myself. Not one. "Darren tells me you work in insurance," she'd mentioned casually while picking at her food. "That must be stable." The way she said stable made it sound like a character flaw. After they left that night, I heard them talking in the hallway outside my apartment. Their voices carried through the thin walls. "She seems sweet," Bryn was saying, but her tone suggested otherwise. "Though that apartment is so small, and the neighborhood isn't exactly, well, you know." "Mom's worked hard to make a nice home for herself," Darren had replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "She's done her best." "Of course she has. I didn't mean anything by it. It's just, when we get married, where will we live? I can't imagine bringing children to visit in a place like that. There's no space for family gatherings, and the building is so old." I'd pressed my ear closer to the door, my heart sinking with every word. "We'll figure something out," Darren had said. "Maybe we can find a nice apartment, save up for something better." "Darling, my parents have already offered to help with housing as a wedding gift. They're thinking about purchasing something for us, a real home where we can build our life together, somewhere appropriate for the kind of family we want to create." That night, after they left, I sat alone with a cup of tea and faced a hard truth. In Bryn's world, I was an embarrassment. My son, the boy I'd raised with such love and sacrifice, was already being taught to see our life together as something to escape from. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day researching real estate websites. If Bryn's parents were going to buy them an apartment, I needed to understand what that meant. I looked at listings in their price range, toured buildings online, educated myself about down payments and mortgage rates. By evening, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 24 hours earlier. I was going to buy them an apartment myself, not because I had money, I didn't. Not because it was financially sensible, it wasn't. But because I refused to let my son start his marriage feeling ashamed of where he came from. And because some foolish part of me still believed that if I could give them this gift, if I could prove my worth through sacrifice, maybe Bryn would finally see me as family instead of an inconvenience. The next 6 months were a blur of second jobs and careful planning. I started working evenings at a grocery store, stocking shelves and running registers 4 nights a week. I took on freelance bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. I sold my mother's jewelry, her china set, everything of value she'd left me except the money itself. I lived on rice and beans, turned my heat down to 58 degrees in winter, walked everywhere instead of driving to save gas money. Every penny went toward building the down payment I'd need. The hardest part was finding the apartment without Darren and Bryn knowing. I had to coordinate with their schedules, pretending to have doctor's appointments or errands when I was actually touring properties with real estate agents. I had to research their preferences by listening carefully to their conversations, noting what they mentioned liking or wanting. When I found 894 Maple Street, I knew it was perfect. A 2-bedroom in a beautiful brick building with hardwood floors, updated kitchen, and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. It was in the exact neighborhood Bryn had mentioned wanting to live in, close to her gym and favorite restaurants. The price was $185,000. My down payment would need to be $37,000. I had exactly $35,000 from my mother's inheritance, and $2,000 I'd managed to save from my extra jobs. I sat in the real estate office signing papers with shaking hands, committing to a monthly mortgage payment of $1,400, nearly double my rent. I'd have to keep both extra jobs indefinitely, maybe find a third one. My retirement fund would have to wait. My own dreams of maybe buying a small house someday, of having a garden or a spare bedroom for grandchildren to visit, all of that evaporated with my signature. But it was worth it, I told myself. This was love. This was what mothers did. The plan was simple. I'd arrange for the apartment to be presented as a gift from Bryn's parents. Her father, Richard, was a real estate developer, so it wouldn't seem unusual for him to purchase properties. I'd found a way to make the transaction appear to come from one of his business entities. When Darren called me, ecstatic about their incredible wedding gift, I felt a mixture of joy and heartbreak that I couldn't quite name. "Mom, you won't believe it. Bryn's parents bought us an apartment, a real apartment with 2 bedrooms and everything. Bryn says her dad wanted us to have a proper start to our marriage." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I'd managed to say, my voice steady despite the fact that I was crying. "You deserve every happiness. I wish you could see it, but they want to keep it as a surprise until after the wedding. Bryn says they're having it furnished and everything." For the next year, I'd watched my son build his life in the home I'd secretly provided. I'd driven by sometimes just to see the lights in their windows, to know they were happy and comfortable. I'd never been invited inside. Now, sitting in my kitchen with those documents spread in front of me, I realized how utterly naive I'd been. I'd thought my sacrifice would somehow bridge the gap between my world and Bryn's. I'd thought providing them with the perfect home would earn me a place in their perfect life. Instead, it had made me even more invisible. They lived in luxury while I worked 3 jobs to pay for it, and not once had either of them thought to question where their good fortune had come from. Not once had they wondered if they could help me in return. The wedding had been the final wake-up call. When Bryn banished me from the photos, when she sent me to the kitchen like hired help, when my own son stood silent and let it happen, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't Darren's mother anymore. I was just the woman who'd raised him, who continued to provide for him from the shadows, who was useful when needed and invisible when not. But I owned something they didn't know about, something that could change everything. I reached for my phone and dialed the number I'd memorized weeks ago, but never had the courage to call. "Henderson Real Estate, this is Patricia." "Hello," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "This is Roberta Morrison. I own property at 894 Maple Street, apartment 12B. I'd like to discuss putting it on the market immediately." Patricia Henderson turned out to be everything I needed in a real estate agent. Efficient, discreet, and completely uninterested in the personal drama behind my decision to sell. When I met her at her office the Monday after Darren and Bryn left for their honeymoon in Italy, she spread the property details across her desk with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd handled thousands of transactions. "Beautiful apartment," she said, scanning the photos on her computer screen. 2-bedroom, 2-bath, hardwood floors throughout. The building has excellent bones, and that neighborhood is hot right now. We should have no trouble moving this quickly. "How quickly?" I asked, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "Well, that depends on your price point. If you're willing to price it competitively, I'd say we could have offers within a week, maybe less. The market's been crazy lately. Inventory is low, demand is high. Young couples are desperate for move-in ready places exactly like this." I thought about Darren and Bryn, probably sipping wine on some Italian terrace at that very moment. completely oblivious to what was happening to their perfect life back home. They'd taken a 2-week honeymoon, paid for, I was sure, by Bryn's parents. Another gift they'd accepted without question. Another luxury they felt entitled to. "I need it sold before the 20th, I said. That's when they return from their trip. Patricia raised an eyebrow, but didn't ask questions. "That's ambitious, but doable. We'll need to price it right and maybe offer some incentives for a quick closing. Are you prepared to be flexible on terms?" "Whatever it takes." That afternoon, I met Patricia at the apartment building. I'd never actually been inside Darren and Bryn's home. My home, technically. And walking through those rooms felt surreal. They'd decorated it beautifully, I had to admit. Bryn had expensive taste, and the space looked like something out of a magazine. Soft gray walls, modern furniture, artwork that probably cost more than I made in a month. In the living room, wedding photos sat on the mantel, the same professional shots I'd been excluded from. Bryn looked radiant in her white gown, surrounded by her family and friends. Darren stood handsome and proud beside her. I searched every frame for some evidence of myself, some acknowledgement that I'd been there that day. Nothing. But on the kitchen counter, I found something that made my breath catch. The antique silver picture frames I'd given them as a wedding gift, still in their box, unopened. The card I'd written, expressing my love for Darren and welcome to Bryn, was still sealed inside. They hadn't even bothered to unwrap it. "The staging is already perfect," Patricia was saying, making notes on her tablet. "We won't need to do anything except maybe add some fresh flowers, make sure everything's spotless. This place will show beautifully." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I was standing in a home I'd sacrificed everything to provide, looking at evidence that my gifts, both the apartment and my presence at their wedding, meant nothing to them. "Mrs. Morrison, are you all right?" I turned away from the unopened gift and managed a smile. "I'm fine. Let's get the paperwork started." The next few days passed in a blur of activity that I had to carefully hide from everyone who knew me. I called in sick to my regular job, something I'd never done without actually being ill. I used vacation days I'd been saving for emergencies. I couldn't risk anyone asking why I was suddenly so busy with real estate appointments and legal meetings. Patricia hadn't been exaggerating about the market. By Wednesday, we had 3 showings scheduled. By Friday, we had 2 offers, both above asking price. One young couple, both doctors, offered $205,000 cash with a 10-day closing. "It's an excellent offer," Patricia explained, as we sat in her office reviewing the paperwork. "Cash deals close fast, no financing complications, no appraisal issues. You could have the money in your account by next Friday, and they can take possession immediately? As soon as the papers are signed and the funds transfer. They're eager to move in. Apparently they're renting month to month right now and want to get settled." I thought about the timing. Darren and Bryn would return from Italy on Sunday the 20th. If we closed on Friday the 18th, the new owners could change the locks over the weekend. By the time my son and his wife returned from their romantic European adventure, their key wouldn't work anymore. "Accept the offer," I said. That weekend, while Darren and Bryn were probably touring the Colosseum or floating through Venice in a gondola, I was coordinating the most complicated logistical operation of my life. The new owners, Dr. Amanda Chen and Dr. Michael Rodriguez, were incredibly understanding when I explained that the previous tenants had left some belongings behind that needed to be collected before they moved in. What I didn't tell them was that I was about to pack up my son's entire life. I hired a moving company for Saturday morning, paying extra for weekend service and short notice. 3 men with a truck arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, and I let them into the apartment with my key, the key I'd had made when I first purchased the property, the key Darren and Bryn never knew existed. "We're packing everything," I told the crew chief, a patient man named Miguel who seemed unfazed by the unusual circumstances. "Clothing, personal items, everything except the furniture. The furniture stays." "Where's it all going, ma'am?" I'd rented a storage unit across town, a 10 by 15 space that would hold everything they owned until they figured out their next move. I'd paid for 3 months up front, enough time for them to make new arrangements, but not so long that they could take my generosity for granted. Walking through their home as strangers packed up their belongings felt like performing surgery on my own heart. I supervised as they carefully wrapped Bryn's expensive dishes, her designer clothes, her collection of handbags that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. I watched them box up Darren's books, his college diplomas, his childhood photographs that I'd given him when he moved out. In their bedroom closet, I found something that made me pause. A small wooden box tucked behind Bryn's shoes, the kind of box people use to store important documents or sentimental items. I opened it, telling myself I was just checking for valuables that needed special care. Inside were letters. Love letters, but not from Darren. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the signature at the bottom reading, "Forever yours, Marcus." The dates were recent, within the last 6 months. Some were written while she was engaged to my son. I stared at those letters, my hands trembling slightly as the implications sank in. Bryn had been having an affair, maybe still was, the perfect bride who'd humiliated me at her wedding, who'd treated me like hired help while accepting the home I'd secretly provided, had been cheating on my son. For a moment, I considered keeping the letters, using them. The information in that box could destroy Bryn's marriage and vindicate every terrible feeling I'd had about her. But then I realized something important. I didn't need to destroy their marriage. I didn't need to expose Bryn's secrets or prove that she was the terrible person I'd always suspected her to be. I was already giving them something far more valuable than scandal, the truth about who they really were when the comfortable lies were stripped away. I put the letters back in the box and had them packed with everything else. Whatever happened between Darren and Bryn was their business. My business was teaching them what it felt like to have their security ripped away without warning, just like they'd ripped away my dignity at their wedding. By 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon, the apartment was empty of all their personal belongings. The movers had been thorough and careful, leaving only the furniture and the basic appliances. The place looked exactly as it had when I'd first bought it. Beautiful, clean, ready for new occupants. I stood in the empty living room one last time, looking at the space where their wedding photos had been displayed just hours earlier. The mantel was bare now, just clean marble reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. On Monday morning, I met with the attorney handling the closing. The paperwork was extensive but straightforward. I was transferring ownership of the property to Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez for the agreed-upon price of $205,000. After paying off the remaining mortgage balance of $147,000 and covering closing costs, I would walk away with about $52,000. It wasn't enough to replace my retirement savings, but it was enough to give me options I'd never had before. Enough to quit my second and third jobs, maybe even take a real vacation for the first time in decades. The buyers want to change the locks immediately, the attorney mentioned as we reviewed the final documents. They're concerned about security, given that the previous occupants might still have keys. That's perfectly fine, I said, signing my name with a steady hand. On Friday afternoon, I watched from my car across the street as the locksmith installed new deadbolts on the apartment that had consumed my life savings and 2 years of extra work. Dr. Chen and Dr. Rodriguez arrived with their moving truck just as he finished, young and excited to start their life in their new home. They looked happy. They looked grateful. They looked like the kind of people who would never take their good fortune for granted. That evening, I sat in my small apartment with a glass of wine and my phone. I had a text from Darren sent from Rome. "Having amazing time. Can't wait to get home and start our new life together." I typed back, "Enjoy every moment, sweetheart. Home will be waiting for you." It was true, in a way. Home would be waiting, just not the home they expected. Somewhere over the Atlantic, my son and his wife were probably watching movies and planning their future, completely unaware that their old life no longer existed. In less than 48 hours, they would discover what I'd learned long ago, that security is fragile, that comfort can disappear without warning, and that sometimes the people you trust most are the ones who hurt you deepest. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast to the empty apartment across town, to the storage unit full of their belongings, and to the lesson they were about to learn. Some gifts, I'd discovered, come with strings attached, And sometimes those strings are actually chains. Sunday morning, the 20th of October, I woke up earlier than usual. My stomach had been churning since 3 a.m., not from guilt or regret, but from a mixture of anticipation and something that felt almost like excitement. Today was the day Darren and Bryn would return from their Italian honeymoon to discover that their perfect life had vanished while they were gone. I made myself a pot of coffee and sat by my living room window, which offered a partial view of Maple Street. Their flight was supposed to land at noon, which meant they'd probably be back at the apartment by 2 o'clock. I'd positioned myself to watch, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I needed to see their faces when reality hit. Maybe I needed to witness the moment they learned what I'd learned years ago, that security is just an illusion. My phone had been buzzing with texts from them throughout their trip. Photos of pasta dishes and ancient ruins, selfies in front of the Trevi Fountain, videos of gondola rides through Venice. They looked so happy, so carefree, so completely convinced that their charmed life would continue forever. "Mom, Italy is incredible," Darren had texted yesterday. "Bryn says we should plan to come back for our first anniversary. Maybe you can visit us when we get home. See the apartment properly for the first time." The irony of that message had made me laugh out loud. Visit them in the apartment I'd secretly owned for 2 years. The apartment I'd just sold to strangers while they were throwing coins in Italian fountains and making wishes that would never come true. At exactly 1:45 p.m., I saw the taxi pull up in front of their building. Darren got out first, looking tanned and relaxed in clothes that probably cost more than I spent on myself in 6 months. He pulled their luggage from the trunk while Bryn emerged from the other side, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the long flight, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes. They looked like a couple from a magazine spread. Young, beautiful, privileged, completely unaware that their world was about to collapse. I watched them wheel their suitcases up the front steps, Bryn gesturing animatedly as she told some story from their trip. Darren was laughing, his arm around her waist, his face bright with the kind of happiness that comes from 2 weeks of luxury and romance. They disappeared into the building, and I found myself holding my breath. It took exactly 4 minutes for my phone to ring. "Mom?" Darren's voice was confused, slightly breathless. "Mom, something's wrong with our key. It won't work." I closed my eyes, steadying myself before answering. "What do you mean, honey? Our key won't open the door. The lock must be broken or something. But that doesn't make sense. We've only been gone 2 weeks." In the background, I could hear Bryn's voice, sharp with irritation. "Try it again. You must be doing something wrong." "I've tried it 6 times, Darren said into the phone. "Mom, this is really weird. Should I call the building manager? Or maybe Bryn's dad? He owns the place. Maybe there was some kind of maintenance issue while we were gone." My heart was pounding, but my voice remained calm. "That does sound strange, sweetheart. Maybe you should try talking to someone in the building." There was muffled conversation. Then Darren came back on the line. "Mom, I'm going to call you back. Bryn wants to call her father first, see if he knows what's going on." The line went dead. I sat there staring at my phone, imagining the scene playing out 6 blocks away. Bryn frantically dialing her father's number, trying to reach the man she thought owned their apartment. Darren pacing in the hallway, surrounded by luggage, trying to understand why they were suddenly locked out of their own home. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. "Mom." Darren's voice was different now, tighter, with an edge of panic I recognized from his childhood when he'd lost something important. "Something's really wrong. Bryn's dad says he never bought us an apartment. He says he doesn't know what we're talking about." "What?" I tried to sound as shocked as he did. "He's saying he never promised us a place, never bought anything, never even looked at real estate in our area." "But Mom, that's impossible. We've been living there for 2 years. The apartment is gorgeous. It's furnished. It's ours." In the background, Bryn's voice was getting louder, more shrill. "He's lying. He has to be lying. Call him back." "Bryn thinks maybe there's some misunderstanding," Darren continued, but I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. "But Mom, what if something happened while we were gone? What if there was a mistake with the paperwork, or identity theft, or—" His voice trailed off as the implications began to sink in. "Honey, I'm sure there's an explanation," I said gently. Why don't you try talking to someone in the building management office? Another silence, then, the building manager is here now. He's saying the apartment was sold last week. He's saying new people own it now, and they changed the locks yesterday. Sold? But that's impossible if Bryn's parents own it. That's what I said. But he's showing us paperwork and… Darren's voice cracked. Mom, he's saying the previous owner was someone named Roberta Morrison. But that's your maiden name. That has to be a coincidence, right? My mouth went dry. I hadn't expected them to figure out the connection so quickly. I thought they'd be too shocked, too focused on their immediate crisis to think clearly about the details. I don't know what to tell you, sweetheart. That is strange. The building manager wants to call the police, Darren continued, his voice getting higher. He thinks maybe someone used a fake identity to steal the property. Mom, our stuff is gone. Our clothes, our furniture, everything. It's like we never lived here. I could hear Bryn crying now, her sobs echoing through the phone. The woman who'd banished me from wedding photos was falling apart in a hallway, surrounded by luggage, locked out of a life she'd never actually owned. Where are your things? I asked, though I knew the answer. Gone. Everything's gone. The building manager says the movers came yesterday, packed everything up. He thought we were moving out voluntarily, but we didn't hire any movers. We don't know anything about this. The pieces were falling into place in Darren's mind. I could hear it happening in real time. The confusion was giving way to a terrible understanding. Mom, he said slowly, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. My heart stopped. Of course, honey. Did you? Do you know anything about this apartment? About who really owns it? The question hung in the air between us. 27 years of motherhood crystallizing into a single moment of choice. I could lie. I could claim ignorance, act shocked and sympathetic, offer to help them figure out this mysterious situation. Or I could tell him the truth. Yes, I said quietly. I know about the apartment. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Bryn's crying stop abruptly, could picture both of them staring at the phone in shock. You know about it? Darren's voice was barely a whisper. I bought it, I said, the words coming out steady and clear. 2 years ago, when you got engaged, I used my inheritance from Grandma, worked 3 jobs to make the payments. I wanted you to have a beautiful home to start your marriage. You bought it? But Bryn's parents. Her parents never bought you anything. That was a story I created so you wouldn't feel guilty about accepting help from me. Another long silence. Then Darren's voice, small and confused. But why are we locked out? Why is our stuff gone? Because I sold it, I said simply. Last week while you were in Italy. I sold it to a lovely young couple who needed a home. You what? This was Bryn's voice, shrill and furious, grabbing the phone from Darren. You sold our apartment? You can't do that. It's ours. Actually, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded, it was mine. I paid for it. My name was on the deed. I made every mortgage payment for 2 years. And now I've sold it and bought myself some peace of mind. You're insane, Bryn screamed into the phone. You can't just sell someone's home. We'll sue you. We'll call the police. You'll what? I interrupted, my voice growing stronger. Sue me for selling property I owned? Call the police on someone who committed no crime? Face the fact that you've been living in a home you never paid for, never owned, never even bothered to ask questions about? Darren took the phone back. Mom, I don't understand. Why would you do this? Where are we supposed to live? Our stuff is gone. Our home is gone. Your stuff is in a storage unit on Elm Street, unit number 47. I've paid for 3 months. That should give you time to make new arrangements. New arrangements? His voice cracked. Mom, we don't have money for a new place. We spent everything on the wedding and honeymoon. We thought we didn't need to save because we already had a home. The same way I thought I didn't need to worry about being humiliated at my only child's wedding because I was his mother. The words hung in the air like a slap. Finally, I'd said it out loud. What? What are you talking about? But even as he asked, I could hear in his voice that he knew exactly what I was talking about. Your wife banned me from your wedding photos, Darren. She sent me to work in the kitchen like hired help while she posed for pictures with her real family. You stood there and let it happen. Mom, that was just what? Just Bryn being particular about aesthetics? Just me being too practical and ugly for your perfect wedding album? Just the woman who raised you alone for 18 years being put in her place? Silence. Then Bryn's voice in the background, vicious and desperate. Tell her we're sorry. Tell her whatever she wants to hear. We need our house back. But Darren didn't say anything. For the first time in years, maybe in his entire adult life, my son was truly quiet. I worked 3 jobs for 2 years to give you that apartment, I continued. I emptied my retirement fund, sold everything my mother left me, went into debt I'll be paying off for the rest of my life. I did it because I loved you, because I wanted you to have the best start possible, Mom. And at your wedding, the celebration of the life I'd helped you build, your wife treated me like a servant, and you let her. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't ask. Neither of you ever asked where your good fortune came from. You just accepted it, like you were entitled to it. I could hear them both crying now. Darren's quiet sobs, and Bryn's louder, more desperate weeping. What do you want us to do? Darren asked finally. I looked around my small apartment, at the life I'd built with careful saving and quiet dignity, the life Bryn had dismissed as embarrassing and inadequate. I want you to figure it out, I said. The same way I figured out how to raise a child alone, how to pay for your college, how to buy you a home, how to survive being treated like nothing at your wedding. I want you to grow up. Then I hung up the phone, turned it off, and poured myself a cup of tea. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the neighborhood where my son and his wife now stood homeless, surrounded by suitcases, learning what it felt like when the people you trust most pull the rug out from under your life. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt terrible. Instead, for the first time in years, I felt free. For 3 days after hanging up on Darren, I didn't answer my phone. The calls came constantly, sometimes from his number, sometimes from Bryn's, occasionally from numbers I didn't recognize that I assumed were their friends or family members trying to reach me on their behalf. I let them all go to voicemail, but I didn't listen to the messages. Not yet. I wasn't ready to hear the pleading, the anger, or whatever manipulation they thought might work. Instead, I went to work at my regular job for the first time in weeks, without the crushing weight of 3 different employment schedules. For the first time in 2 years, I didn't have to rush from my insurance office to the grocery store for an evening shift, then home to do bookkeeping until midnight. I worked my normal 8 hours, came home to my small apartment, and cooked myself a proper dinner while watching the evening news. It felt like being human again. On Wednesday evening, I finally decided to listen to the voicemails. There were 43 of them. The first few were from Sunday night, right after our phone call. Darren's voice, broken and confused. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this. We're staying at a hotel tonight, but we can't afford this for long. Please. Bryn's voice on the next message, trying to sound reasonable but with an edge of barely controlled panic. Mrs. Morrison, this is Bryn. I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. Darren and I would love to sit down and talk this through like adults. I'm sure we can work something out. By Tuesday, the tone had shifted. Darren sounded desperate. Mom, we went to the storage unit. Thank you for saving our things, but we can't afford a new apartment. The rental market is crazy right now, and we don't have first month's rent plus deposit plus all the fees. We need help. Please call me back. Bryn's messages became increasingly frantic. You can't just leave us homeless. This is insane. Darren is your son. How can you do this to your own child? But it was the message from Wednesday afternoon that made me sit up straight. A woman's voice I didn't recognize, older with the crisp diction of someone accustomed to being obeyed. This is Victoria Whitman, Bryn's mother. I understand there's been some sort of family dispute that has left my daughter and her husband without housing. This is completely unacceptable. I'm calling to inform you that we'll be taking legal action if this situation isn't resolved immediately. No one treats a Whitman this way. I had to laugh. Bryn's mother, calling to threaten me with lawyers because her daughter's free ride had ended. The same people who had supposedly bought the apartment for their daughter, but somehow knew nothing about it when the locks were changed. The next message was from Darren again, and this one was different. His voice was tired, defeated. Mom, Bryn's parents are saying they never promised us anything. Her dad is claiming he doesn't know what we're talking about when we mention the apartment gift. Bryn is. She's not handling this well. She's saying things that don't make sense, blaming everyone except herself. I'm starting to wonder if I ever really knew her at all. That message had been left just 2 hours ago. I poured myself a glass of wine and called him back. He answered on the first ring. Mom? Hello, Darren. Oh, God, thank you for calling me back. I wasn't sure you would. Where are you staying? A motel on Route 9, the Starlight Inn. It's pretty awful, but it's what we can afford right now. I knew the place. $49 a night, weekly rates available, the kind of place where people stayed when they'd run out of other options. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bryn, who'd found my modest apartment embarrassing, was now living somewhere that made my neighborhood look like Beverly Hills. How is Bryn handling it? A long pause. Not well. Mom, she's saying things that are really bothering me. About you, about our family, about people who don't have money. I never realized how she really felt about. About people like me? Yeah. His voice was barely a whisper. About people like us. Tell me what she's been saying. Another pause, then words that came out in a rush. She keeps talking about how this is all your fault, how you're vindictive and jealous of our happiness. She said you probably planned this from the beginning, that you never really wanted her in the family. And when I tried to defend you, tried to explain that you worked 3 jobs to buy us that apartment, she said. What did she say? She said that was your job, that parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children, and you were just doing what you were supposed to do. She said you had no right to expect gratitude for basic parental duties. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What else? She called you pathetic. She said any real mother would have found a way to help us without making such a big deal about it. She said. He stopped, his voice breaking slightly. Say it, Darren. She said she never wanted you in our wedding photos because you looked poor and sad, and it would have reminded everyone that I came from nothing. She said she was protecting me from embarrassment. The words hit exactly as they were meant to, like knives, precise and sharp. But instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of validation. Finally, Bryn's mask was slipping. Finally, Darren was seeing what I'd known all along. And what did you say to that? I told her that was horrible. I told her you were my mother, and she had no right to talk about you that way. And he took a shaky breath. She said if I wanted to keep defending poor people instead of building a life with her, maybe I wasn't the man she thought she married. I see. Mom, I'm starting to think I made a terrible mistake. This woman I married, when things got difficult, she became someone I don't recognize. Or maybe this is who she always was, and I just didn't want to see it. I sat in my quiet kitchen, listening to my son finally understand what I'd tried to protect him from. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to rush over to that awful motel and rescue them both. But the larger part of me knew this was necessary. This was the lesson he needed to learn. What are you going to do? I asked. I don't know. We can't afford an apartment, not a decent one. Everything requires first month, last month, and a security deposit, and we spent our savings on the honeymoon. Bryn keeps saying her parents will help, but they're not returning her calls. I think they're embarrassed by the whole situation. And work? Are you both still employed? Yeah, but Bryn's been missing days because she's too upset to function. She keeps crying and saying her life is ruined. My boss has been understanding, but I can't concentrate. Everything feels like it's falling apart. In the background, I could hear a door slam and Bryn's voice, shrill and angry. Are you talking to her? Hang up. Don't you dare beg that crazy woman for anything. I should go, Darren said quickly. Wait, there's something you need to know. What? I found letters in Bryn's belongings when I had them packed. Love letters from someone named Marcus, dated during your engagement. Silence. Then, what? She was having an affair, Darren. Maybe still is. I put the letters in the storage unit with everything else. Box 47, behind her shoes. I heard him take in a sharp breath. Are you sure? I'm sure. More silence, then Bryn's voice getting closer. Who are you talking to? Darren, get off the phone. I have to go, he whispered. Darren, wait, one more thing. What? You asked me what I want you to do. I want you to decide who you really are. Are you the man who stands silent while his wife humiliates his mother? Are you someone who accepts gifts without asking where they come from? Are you going to spend your life apologizing for where you came from? Or are you going to remember that the woman who raised you did it with love and dignity? The line went quiet except for the sound of Bryn's approaching footsteps and her increasingly agitated voice. Think about it, I said, and hung up. 2 hours later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Bryn. You vindictive bitch, she snarled without preamble. You've ruined everything. My marriage, my home, my life. All because you're jealous that I'm young and beautiful and everything you'll never be. Is that what you think this is about? I know what this is about. You couldn't stand that Darren chose me over you. You couldn't handle that he had a real family now, not just some pathetic single mother who worked retail jobs. I felt remarkably calm. Bryn, I worked 3 jobs for 2 years to buy you that apartment. So what? That was your choice. Nobody asked you to. You're right. Nobody asked me to, just like nobody's asking me to help you now. You can't just abandon your own son, the way you abandoned any pretense of respect for the woman who made your comfortable life possible. I don't owe you anything. You're not my mother. You're absolutely right. I'm not. But I was Darren's mother, and you made sure I knew exactly how worthless that made me in your eyes. There was a pause. Then her voice came back harder. If you don't fix this, I'll make sure Darren never speaks to you again. I'll turn him against you completely. Bryn, I think you'll find that ship has already sailed. What's that supposed to mean? It means your husband is currently reading love letters you received from Marcus during your engagement. It means the mask is coming off, and for the first time, Darren is seeing exactly who he married. The silence that followed was beautiful. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all its venom, replaced by something close to panic. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. Just like you don't know where your beautiful apartment came from, or why your parents suddenly can't remember promising to buy you a home. Those letters, they don't mean anything. Marcus is just a friend. I'm sure Darren will understand that when you explain it to him. You can't do this to me. I have nowhere else to go. My parents are furious about the embarrassment this has caused. My friends all think I'm a fraud. Darren is the only person I have left. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I wasn't good enough to be in your wedding photos. I hung up on her mid-sob. An hour later, Darren called one final time. Mom, I found the letters. And? I'm coming home. Not to you. I know I need to earn that right back. But I'm leaving her. I'm getting the marriage annulled. What changed your mind? When I confronted her about the letters, she didn't deny it. She just said that Marcus understood her in ways I never could, that he came from her world and knew how to treat a woman properly. Then she said if I was any kind of real man, I would have been able to provide for her the way her father did, and she wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere. I'm sorry, sweetheart. No, Mom. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let her treat you the way she did. I'm sorry I was too blind to see what she really was. I'm sorry I took everything you sacrificed for granted. I felt tears starting, but they weren't sad tears. What will you do now? I don't know. Find a small apartment I can actually afford. Maybe go back to school, get a better job. Figure out how to be the kind of man you raised me to be instead of the kind of man she wanted me to pretend to be. And Bryn? She's calling everyone she knows, trying to find somewhere to stay. Her parents won't take her back. Apparently, this whole situation has embarrassed them socially. Her friends all thought she was married to someone with money. Marcus, it turns out, is married with kids and was never going to leave his wife. So she's alone? Completely. Just like she made sure you felt at our wedding. I closed my eyes, feeling something I'd carried for months finally lifting from my shoulders. Darren? Yeah, Mom. When you're ready. Really ready. Not just sorry because everything fell apart. Call me. We'll have dinner. In my small, practical apartment with my second-hand furniture. I'd like that. And Mom? Yes? Thank you. For everything. For the sacrifices I never knew about. For the love I took for granted. And for teaching me this lesson, even though it must have hurt you to do it. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and finished my wine. Outside my window, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had 3 days ago, but inside my small practical apartment, everything had changed. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't taken for granted. I wasn't the woman who gave everything and received nothing in return. I was Roberta Morrison, and I had finally learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop letting people treat you like you don't matter, even if one of those people is your own son. 6 months later, I was standing in the kitchen of my new home, a small 2-bedroom cottage I'd bought with the money from selling Darren's apartment, when I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Through the window, I watched my son climb out of a modest used Honda, carrying a bouquet of grocery store flowers and what looked like a homemade casserole dish. He looked different, thinner maybe, but stronger somehow. His expensive clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a button-down shirt. His hair was a little longer, less perfectly styled. He looked like the boy I'd raised, not the man Bryn had tried to reshape him into. This was his 3rd visit since the day he'd called to tell me his marriage was over. The first time, 2 months ago, he'd stood on my front porch for 10 minutes apologizing before I'd invited him in. The second time, we'd managed to have coffee and awkward conversation about safe topics like work and weather. Today felt different, though I wasn't sure why. I opened the door before he could knock. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, sweetheart. Come in." He followed me into the kitchen, setting the casserole dish on my counter with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to take domestic gestures for granted. "I made lasagna," he said, almost shyly. "I've been learning to cook. Turns out it's not as hard as I thought when you can't afford to eat out every night." I smiled, genuinely pleased. "I'd love to try it. How's the apartment working out?" He'd moved into a 1-bedroom place in a neighborhood similar to mine. Not fancy, but clean and safe and within his means. No help from me, no help from anyone. He'd furnished it slowly with second-hand finds and careful budgeting. It's good. Small, but good. I'm learning to appreciate small. We moved to the living room, settling into the comfortable chairs I'd arranged around a small coffee table. The cottage was a far cry from the luxury apartment I'd bought him, but it was mine in a way that place had never been. Every piece of furniture chosen by me, every decoration reflecting my taste, every mortgage payment coming from money I'd earned honestly. "Mom, I need to tell you something," Darren said, his hands clasped in front of him. "All right." "I've been going to therapy." I raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Oh?" "Yeah." I realized after everything happened that I had no idea who I really was. I'd spent so long trying to be what Bryn wanted, trying to fit into her world, that I'd lost track of my own values. The therapist is helping me figure out how I became someone who could stand by while his wife humiliated his mother. I felt a flutter of something. Not quite forgiveness, not yet, but something softer than the anger I'd carried for so long. "What have you learned?" He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I learned that I was ashamed, not of you exactly, but of being poor. Of having grown up with less than other kids. When I got my job at the accounting firm, when I started making decent money, I thought I could leave all that behind. And when Bryn came along, with her family's money and connections, I thought she was my ticket to really belonging somewhere. And now? Now I understand that I already belonged somewhere. I belonged with you, in the life we built together. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. It was earned. And I threw it away for something that was never real at all. I studied my son's face, looking for the sincerity I'd stopped believing in. What I saw there was humility, something I'd never seen in him before the apartment disappeared. "Tell me about Bryn," I said. "What happened after the annulment?" His expression darkened. "It got ugly. When she realized I was serious about ending the marriage, when her parents made it clear they weren't going to bail her out, she tried everything. First, she begged, promised to change, said she'd learned to appreciate what we had. When that didn't work, she tried to convince people that I'd abandoned her, that I was the villain in the story. And did people believe her? Some did at first, but then the truth about the apartment came out. that you'd been the real owner all along, that her parents had never bought us anything. People started asking questions about other things she'd claimed. Her whole house of cards came tumbling down. Where is she now? Last I heard, she was living with Marcus. Turned out he wasn't as married as she thought. His wife had been planning to divorce him anyway. They deserve each other. I felt a surprising lack of satisfaction at this news. 6 months ago, hearing that Bryn had been reduced to living with her affair partner might have pleased me. Now it just seemed sad and predictable. Darren, why are you really here today? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. I wanted to give you this. I took it, recognizing my own handwriting on the front. It was the card I'd written to go with their wedding gift. The antique silver frames I'd found still in their box, unopened, when I'd packed up their apartment. I finally read it, he said quietly. I never opened it before. Bryn said we'd read cards together later, but we never did. When I found it in the storage unit, I realized there were probably dozens of things like that. Gestures from you that I just ignored because I was so caught up in my new life. I opened the envelope, though I remembered every word I'd written. The card showed a simple image of a family tree, and inside I'd written, "To Darren and Bryn, may your home be filled with love, laughter, and the strength that comes from knowing who you are and where you come from. All my love always, Mom." I cried when I read it, he admitted. Really cried, for the first time since I was a kid. Because I realized that while I was trying so hard to run away from where I came from, you were trying to give me a foundation to build something real on. And what did you build instead? Nothing. I built nothing. A marriage based on lies, a lifestyle I couldn't afford, a life that disappeared the moment it was tested. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Outside, I could hear children playing in the neighborhood, the sound of normal life continuing around us. Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask you for anything anymore, but I need to know, is there a chance we can rebuild our relationship? Not go back to how things were, because that wasn't healthy for either of us, but build something new, something based on honesty and respect? I looked at my son, really looked at him. The entitlement that had hardened his features was gone, replaced by something more genuine. The expensive arrogance had been stripped away, leaving behind the person I'd raised him to be before I'd accidentally taught him that I would accept any treatment as long as he was happy. I'd like that, I said simply. His eyes filled with tears. Really? Really. But there are conditions. Anything. First, you need to understand that what I did, selling the apartment, leaving you both to figure things out, wasn't about revenge. It was about teaching you that actions have consequences, that people who love you aren't automatically required to accept being treated poorly. He nodded. I understand that now. Second, I need you to understand that I'm not the same person I was before. I'm not going to sacrifice my own well-being for your comfort anymore. I'm not going to work multiple jobs to fund a lifestyle you can't afford. I'm not going to pretend to be less than I am so you can feel better about who you choose to spend your life with. I wouldn't want you to. I can see now how strong you are, how much you accomplished. I was an idiot for ever being ashamed of that. Third, if you ever get serious about someone again, she has to accept me as I am. In my small house, with my practical clothes, with my ordinary life. If she can't treat me with basic human dignity, she's not welcome in our family. Agreed, completely. I reached over and took his hand. Then yes, we can rebuild this, but slowly and with honesty this time. He squeezed my hand, tears running down his cheeks. Thank you, Mom. I know I don't deserve this chance, but I promise I'll earn it. We spent the rest of the afternoon cooking together, sharing stories about our separate journeys over the past 6 months. Darren told me about learning to budget, about making friends who didn't care about his designer clothes or expensive address. I told him about the peace I'd found in my cottage, about the book club I'd joined, about the small pleasures of a life lived within my means. As evening approached and he prepared to leave, Darren paused at the front door. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you regret it? Selling the apartment, putting us through all that? I considered the question seriously. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that you had to learn such a hard lesson. But do I regret standing up for myself, teaching you that love doesn't mean accepting disrespect? No, I don't regret that at all. He nodded, understanding. I'm glad you did it. Even though it was awful at the time, I'm glad you loved me enough to stop enabling me. After he left, I sat on my front porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the distant sound of traffic and the chirping of birds settling in for the night. 6 months ago, I'd been a woman who worked 3 jobs to fund other people's dreams, while my own life grew smaller and smaller. I'd been someone who accepted crumbs of affection and convinced myself it was love. I'd been invisible in my own family, valued only for what I could provide. Now I was something different. I was a woman who'd bought herself a home with money she'd earned by refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. I was someone who'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop giving until you're given respect in return. I thought about Bryn, probably still cycling through relationships with men who would disappoint her, still convinced that her value lay in her beauty and her ability to extract resources from others. I thought about Darren, slowly learning to build a life based on his own efforts and authentic connections. I thought about myself, finally free to discover who I was when I wasn't busy sacrificing everything for people who'd never asked me to. The cottage around me was small but beautiful, furnished with things I'd chosen because I liked them, not because they fit someone else's vision of what my life should look like. The mortgage payments came from money I'd earned at a single job I enjoyed, not from the exhausting juggling act of multiple employers. The silence was peaceful rather than lonely, because I'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being abandoned. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I realized something that surprised me with its simplicity. I was happy. Not the desperate, anxious happiness of someone afraid to lose what they had, but the deep, quiet satisfaction of someone who'd built exactly the life they wanted. It had taken 62 years and the loss of everything I thought I needed, but I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone, including yourself, is the knowledge that love without respect is just another form of imprisonment. And sometimes, the most beautiful thing about burning down your old life is discovering that you're strong enough to build a better one from the ashes. I finished my tea, locked my front door, and went to bed in my small, practical bedroom, in my modest cottage, in the life I'd finally learned to value. For the first time in decades, I slept without wondering if I was enough. I was more than enough. I was free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.